Hello, my name's Mark. I'm 34 from Ohio, and up until a month ago, I thought I had the whole American dream thing nailed down. I'm married to Amanda, 31, a woman I've loved since we met in college. She's smart, beautiful, and has this knack for lighting up a room. Together, we have a little house in the suburbs, a golden retriever named Max, and a life that seemed pretty perfect on the outside. I work as a financial analyst, which means long hours crunching numbers, but it's stable and it pays the bills. Amanda's a freelance graphic designer. She works from home, which I used to think was the best deal ever. It meant she had flexibility, time to decorate our place, and could keep Max company during the day. She always made working from home sound like a dream, talking about how much she loved setting her own schedule. We've been married for 7 years, and yeah, we've had our ups and downs like any couple. But I honestly believe we were solid. Amanda's always had a bit of a sharp tongue. She's the kind of person who can turn a compliment into a backhanded jab in one breath. Like if I cleaned the kitchen, she'd say, "Oh, so you do know how to use soap." Who knew? It stung sometimes, but I chalked it up to her humor. Looking back now, there were little cracks in the foundation. Nothing glaring, just small things you ignore because life gets busy. She started being less interested in date nights, spending more time on her phone, and making excuses when I suggested we do things together. "I'm swamped with work, or I just need some me time," she'd say, waving me off. Then there was Steve. Steve's our next-door neighbor. He's 38, divorced, and honestly a bit of a character. The kind of guy who mows his lawn shirtless, even in October, and always has some story about his glory days playing college football, which according to him were amazing. Steve's friendly enough, though a bit over the top with his charm. Amanda used to laugh about how he'd always find excuses to come over, borrowing tools, dropping off packages that were accidentally left on his porch, or just showing up to chat. "It's just Steve being Steve," she'd say. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Steve was just the eccentric neighbor who seemed to have a bit of a crush on my wife. But she always brushed it off as harmless, and I trusted her. Trust. Funny how that word feels like a loaded gun now. Looking back, there were so many signs I missed. So many moments I should have questioned, but didn't because I wanted to believe that Amanda and I were on the same team, that we built something unshakable. I guess this is the story of how I learned I was wrong. Things really started to shift about 6 months ago, though again, I didn't see it at the time. Amanda started spending more time outside, walking Max longer than usual, gardening, even though she's never kept a plant alive for more than a week. She'd come back into the house looking flushed and happy, like she'd just stepped off the cover of a lifestyle magazine. "It's nice to get some fresh air," she'd say when I asked. "You should try it sometime, Mark." Her tone was light, but it felt like there was a jab buried in there. Around the same time, Steve seemed to pop up everywhere. If I was taking out the trash, he'd be there, standing by the fence with a beer in hand, ready to chat. If Amanda and I were on the patio, he'd swing by to borrow something or share some random anecdote about his dog, Duke. "Steve's harmless," Amanda would say with a laugh whenever I mentioned it. "He's just lonely." Still, I noticed the little things. How her laugh seemed a bit too enthusiastic when he joked. How she'd stay outside talking to him longer than necessary. How his name came up in conversation more and more. "Oh, Steve said he knows a great landscaper for our yard. Steve recommended this show. We should totally watch it. Steve's so funny. He told me the wildest story today." It was like he was always lingering in the background of our lives. One evening, I came home late after a long day at work. Amanda was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, and barely looked up when I walked in. Max wagged his tail and trotted over, but Amanda just gave me a quick glance. "How was your day?" I asked, dropping my bag by the door. "Fine," she said, not looking up. "What did you do?" "Oh, you know," she said vaguely. "Work took Max for a walk. Steve stopped by. He helped me fix the gate in the backyard." It was sagging again. The way she said it, so casual, so normal, made me pause. Something about it felt off. Not the words themselves, but the way she delivered them, like she was throwing them out to see if I'd bite. "That's nice of him," I said, forcing my voice to stay neutral. "Yeah, he's great," she replied, her tone breezy. Then she got up, kissed me on the cheek like an afterthought, and headed upstairs. I stood there, staring at the empty living room, a strange feeling creeping up my spine. It wasn't jealousy exactly, more like unease, a feeling that something had shifted, and I wasn't sure how or why. Still, I didn't push it. Why would I? Amanda and I had been through rough patches before, and we always came out stronger. Steve was just a neighbor. Amanda was just being friendly, right? At least, that's what I told myself. The unease started settling in like a shadow I couldn't shake. Amanda wasn't outright cold or dismissive, but something was different. She seemed distracted, almost like she was living in a world parallel to mine. Conversations became surface level. When I'd ask about her day, she'd respond with one-word answers or vague phrases like, "Oh, the usual." It felt like she was there, but not really present. One Saturday morning, I suggested we take Max to the lake, something we used to do all the time when we first got him. Amanda barely looked up from her laptop. "I can't," she said, typing furiously. "I have deadlines." "Okay, maybe tomorrow?" I asked, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. She sighed and finally looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Mark, I can't just drop everything because you want to go play in the water. Some of us actually have responsibilities." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I bit my tongue and took Max to the lake on my own, but the joy I usually felt wasn't there. I kept replaying her tone in my head, sharp, dismissive, like I was some inconvenience in her life. Later that evening, Amanda was back outside, watering the plants she used to hate dealing with. I watched from the kitchen window as Steve appeared, holding a bottle of wine. They laughed about something, their voices carrying faintly through the open window. My stomach twisted. When Amanda came back inside, I asked, "What was so funny out there?" She froze for just a split second before answering. "Oh, nothing. Steve just told me about a prank someone played at his office. You wouldn't get it. It's kind of an inside joke." "An inside joke? Since when did they have inside jokes?" I didn't say anything, but I could feel my jaw clench. Things escalated a week later when I came home to find Amanda and Steve in the backyard. He was showing her how to adjust the hinges on the gate again. They were laughing, their heads close together, and she looked genuinely happy. It was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in months. When I walked into the yard, their laughter stopped abruptly. Amanda straightened up, brushing her hands on her jeans like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. "Oh, hey, Mark," she said, her voice a little too cheerful. "Steve was just helping with the gate again." "Still sagging, huh?" I said, forcing a smile. "Weird how it always needs fixing." Steve chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, these older houses, man. Always something." I nodded, but didn't say anything else. Steve left a few minutes later, and Amanda went back inside, saying she needed to finish some work. As I stood there in the quiet yard, staring at the supposedly fixed gate, a thought crept into my mind. A thought I immediately pushed away. Amanda wouldn't do anything. Not with Steve. Not with anyone. Right? Over the next few weeks, the tension between Amanda and me grew. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things or if she really was pulling further away. It was in the small things. How she'd roll her eyes when I asked her to join me for dinner at our favorite spot, or how she'd suddenly forget to include me in plans she made with mutual friends. One evening, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her with takeout from a Thai place she loved. As I walked into the house, I heard laughter, hers and someone else's. My heart dropped for a second before I recognized Steve's voice. "Oh, Steve," Amanda said between giggles. "I can't believe you actually said that to her." I stepped into the living room to find the two of them sitting on the couch. Amanda was curled up with a glass of wine, while Steve sat on the edge, gesturing animatedly. They didn't even notice me at first. "Hey," I said louder than I intended. Amanda startled, spilling a bit of her wine. "Mark, I didn't hear you come in." Steve gave me a sheepish grin. "Oh, hey, man." Amanda mentioned she was home alone, so I thought I'd swing by and keep her company. I stared at him, my grip tightening on the takeout bags. "Well, I'm home now," I said flatly. Amanda stood up quickly, setting her glass down. "Mark, don't be weird. Steve was just telling me about his trip to the beach last weekend. You should have heard the story. It's hilarious." "I'm sure it is," I muttered, heading to the kitchen to set down the food. By the time I came back, Steve was leaving, giving Amanda a quick wave. "Catch you later," he said, flashing me a tight smile before disappearing out the door. Amanda turned to me, her hands on her hips. What's your problem? My problem? I echoed, incredulous. I come home to find you laughing on the couch with Steve, and I'm the one with the problem? She rolled her eyes. Mark, he's a friend. You know how lonely he's been since his divorce. What? Am I supposed to just ignore him? That's not the point, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Why does he need to be here when I'm not? You're being paranoid, she snapped. Steve's been nothing but nice to us. Honestly, I don't even know why I bother trying to be a good neighbor. Her words stung, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to fight, at least not without something more solid to go on. Still, the knot in my stomach didn't go away. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Amanda slept soundly beside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was missing something important. But how do you confront someone you love when all you have is a gut feeling? The tension didn't let up. If anything, it grew worse with every passing day. Amanda's mood swings were getting harder to ignore. One minute she'd be sweet and attentive, asking about my day or making my favorite dinner. The next, she'd be cold and distant, snapping at me over the smallest things. Mark, for the love of God, can you put your shoes away? She shouted one evening, her voice echoing through the living room. I looked up from the TV, confused. They're by the door, where they always are. Well, they're in my way, she huffed, storming out of the room before I could say anything else. It was like walking on eggshells. I never knew which version of Amanda I was going to get. Steve, of course, remained a constant presence. If he wasn't stopping by to borrow something, he was outside working on his car, conveniently shirtless whenever Amanda was out walking Max. Once, I caught her lingering by the fence, chatting with him while Max sniffed around. She was laughing, her head tilted back, completely at ease. Everything okay out here? I asked, stepping outside. Amanda glanced at me, her smile fading slightly. Yeah, we're fine. Steve was just telling me about this hilarious prank he pulled in college. Steve smirked, giving me a little wave. Hey, Mark, how's it going? I didn't answer. Instead, I called Max over and went back inside, my chest tight with frustration. Later that night, I tried to bring it up. You and Steve seem to be spending a lot of time together, I said, keeping my tone casual. Amanda rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go again. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're being ridiculous, she said, crossing her arms. Steve's a friend. That's it. Do you honestly think I have time for anything else with all the work I've been doing lately? Her defensiveness only made me more suspicious, but I didn't want to push her. The last thing I needed was another argument. Still, the doubts lingered. They crept into my mind at work, during my commute, even when I was trying to fall asleep. Was I overthinking this? Was Amanda right? Was I just being paranoid? Or was there something more going on? About a month later, Steve gave us a gift. It was a potted plant of ficus, I think. He brought it over one Saturday afternoon while I was trimming the hedges. Amanda was sitting on the porch, scrolling on her phone, looking as uninterested as ever in yard work. Hey, neighbors, Steve called, sauntering up the driveway with the plant cradled in his arms like it was a newborn. I stopped what I was doing and straightened up, wiping sweat off my forehead. What's that? Thought you two could use a little greenery, he said with his trademark grin. I had an extra, and Amanda mentioned you've been wanting more plants for the house. I glanced at Amanda, who gave me a tight smile. Yeah, I thought it might brighten up the living room, she said. I didn't remember her mentioning plants to me, but I didn't argue. Instead, I took the pot from Steve and muttered a thank you. No problem, Steve said, clapping me on the shoulder. Anything for my favorite neighbors. As he walked away, Amanda called out, Thanks again, Steve. You're the best. I watched him stroll back to his house, my grip tightening on the pot. That evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, I brought it up. Why does Steve feel the need to give us random gifts? Amanda shrugged, stacking plates in the dishwasher. He's just being nice. Why do you always have to look for a problem where there isn't one? Because it's weird, I said, leaning against the counter. He's over here constantly. He's always giving you attention, and now he's bringing us plants? She sighed loudly, slamming the dishwasher door shut. Mark, not everything is some grand conspiracy. Steve is a nice guy. Maybe you should try being nicer to him instead of acting like he's a villain. Her words stung, but I didn't respond. Instead, I went to the living room, staring at the ficus sitting by the window. It was just a plant, harmless, ordinary. So why did it feel like a ticking time bomb? The ficus became an unspoken symbol in our house. Amanda acted like it didn't exist, and I couldn't stop noticing it. Every time I walked past it, I felt this nagging reminder that something was wrong. Life carried on, but the distance between Amanda and me was impossible to ignore. She was spending more time outside, sometimes claiming she needed fresh air or to clear her head. Steve always seemed to be around during those times, tinkering with his car or doing something pointless in his yard. One evening, after Amanda had spent an unusually long time outside walking Max, I decided to ask her about it. She came in looking flushed, her cheeks pink from the cool night air. "Long walk?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She shrugged, hanging Max's leash by the door. "Yeah, needed to clear my head." "Where'd you go?" "Just around the block," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Funny," I replied, leaning against the counter. "I was on the porch earlier. Didn't see you pass by." Her eyes flashed with something, annoyance maybe. "What are you, keeping tabs on me now?" "I'm just curious," I said, folding my arms. "You've been spending a lot of time outside lately." She rolled her eyes. "Mark, I swear, you're acting paranoid. Do you want me to start reporting my every move to you? Would that make you happy?" Her deflection was like a slap in the face. "That's not what I'm saying," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just noticing things, that's all." "Well, maybe stop noticing," she snapped, brushing past me to grab a glass of water. I stood there, watching her as she avoided my gaze. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in my own house with my wife. I felt like I was standing in a stranger's home, with someone I barely recognized. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Something was off. I knew it in my gut, but Amanda was shutting me out, and I didn't know how to reach her anymore. The ficus sat by the window, bathed in moonlight, like it was mocking me. That night was the first time I genuinely couldn't sleep. Usually, no matter how tense things got between Amanda and me, I could shut my eyes and drift off eventually. But not this time. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the fan and Amanda's steady breathing beside me. Every little thing she'd done over the past few months replayed in my mind like a highlight reel I couldn't turn off. Her excuses, her defensiveness, the time she spent outside, and the way she brushed off my questions. It all felt like puzzle pieces I couldn't quite put together. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed. Max followed me downstairs, his tail wagging as he nuzzled against my leg. "At least you're still on my side, buddy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. I poured myself a glass of water and wandered into the living room. The ficus loomed in the corner, its glossy leaves glinting in the faint light from the street lamp outside. I don't know why, but I felt this strange pull toward it, like it was more than just a plant. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe Amanda was right, and I was just being paranoid. But what if I wasn't? I grabbed my phone and opened up Google. I started typing, "Signs your wife is cheating." The articles were full of generic advice, changes in behavior, increased defensiveness, unexplained absences. Nothing I hadn't already noticed. But one phrase jumped out at me. "Trust your gut." My gut was screaming at me, but I didn't have any solid proof. Just suspicions and that ever-present knot in my stomach. Max whined softly, nudging my hand with his nose. "You think I'm crazy too?" I asked, giving him a weak smile. He tilted his head, his big brown eyes full of unconditional love. If only people were as straightforward as dogs. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, my mind spinning in circles. By the time I dragged myself back to bed, the first hints of dawn were creeping through the curtains. Amanda stirred as I climbed in, murmuring something I couldn't make out before rolling over. I lay there, staring at the back of her head, wondering what secrets might be hiding in her sleepy silence. The following week, Amanda brought up the idea of a weekend getaway. "We've both been so stressed lately," she said over breakfast, her tone unusually cheerful. "Why don't we take a trip? Just the two of us." It caught me off guard. For months, she'd barely wanted to spend an evening together, let alone an entire weekend. I couldn't tell if this was an olive branch or some sort of distraction. "Where were you thinking?" I asked cautiously, sipping my coffee, There's that little cabin we rented a few years ago, remember? The one by the lake? It was so peaceful. I did remember. It was one of the best trips we'd ever taken, back when things were simpler, easier. Yeah, I guess that sounds nice, I said, trying to match her enthusiasm. Her eyes lit up. Great! I'll book it for this weekend. As the week went on, I started to feel cautiously optimistic. Maybe this was her way of trying to reconnect, to patch up whatever had been breaking between us. I wanted to believe that so badly. When Saturday rolled around, we packed up the car and headed out. The drive was quiet, but not unpleasant. Amanda hummed along to the radio, and Max snoozed in the back seat. The cabin was just as I remembered, nestled in the woods, with a stunning view of the lake. Amanda seemed genuinely happy as she unpacked our bags and set up a little picnic on the deck. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, we sat by the fire pit, sipping wine and sharing old stories. Amanda laughed in that carefree way I hadn't heard in ages, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe things could go back to how they used to be. But as the night wore on, that familiar unease crept back in. Amanda's phone buzzed, and she quickly silenced it, slipping it into her pocket. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just a work thing," she said, her voice too casual. "Work. Always work." I didn't press her, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Even here, miles away from home, it felt like something was lurking just beneath the surface. The following week, Amanda brought up the idea of a weekend getaway. "We've both been so stressed lately," she said over breakfast, her tone unusually cheerful. "Why don't we take a trip? Just the two of us." It caught me off guard. For months, she'd barely wanted to spend an evening together, let alone an entire weekend. I couldn't tell if this was an olive branch or some sort of distraction. "Where were you thinking?" I asked cautiously, sipping my coffee. "There's that little cabin we rented a few years ago, remember? The one by the lake? It was so peaceful." I did remember. It was one of the best trips we'd ever taken, back when things were simpler, easier. "Yeah, I guess that sounds nice," I said, trying to match her enthusiasm. Her eyes lit up. "Great! I'll book it for this weekend." As the week went on, I started to feel cautiously optimistic. Maybe this was her way of trying to reconnect, to patch up whatever had been breaking between us. I wanted to believe that so badly. When Saturday rolled around, we packed up the car and headed out. The drive was quiet, but not unpleasant. Amanda hummed along to the radio, and Max snoozed in the back seat. The cabin was just as I remembered, nestled in the woods with a stunning view of the lake. Amanda seemed genuinely happy as she unpacked our bags and set up a little picnic on the deck. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, we sat by the fire pit, sipping wine and sharing old stories. Amanda laughed in that carefree way I hadn't heard in ages, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe things could go back to how they used to be. But as the night wore on, that familiar unease crept back in. Amanda's phone buzzed, and she quickly silenced it, slipping it into her pocket. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just a work thing," she said, her voice too casual. "Work. Always work." I didn't press her, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Even here, miles away from home, it felt like something was lurking just beneath the surface. Sunday morning at the cabin started off beautifully. Amanda was in a good mood, humming as she made breakfast. Max lounged by the fireplace, wagging his tail whenever Amanda tossed him scraps of bacon. I tried to soak in the peace, but that knot in my stomach was still there, refusing to let me relax. After breakfast, Amanda said she was going to take a quick shower before we headed out for a hike. I stayed at the table, scrolling through my phone and sipping my coffee. That's when it happened. Amanda's phone buzzed on the counter. She'd left it there, something she rarely did. For a moment, I stared at it, torn. I didn't want to invade her privacy. But then it buzzed again, and again. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen and saw a name I recognized. Steve. My chest tightened as I reached for the phone. The lock screen showed part of the message. "Wish you were here. Last night was incredible." The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Max jumped up, startled, but I barely noticed. My mind was spinning, my hands trembling as I stared at the words on the screen. Incredible. Last night? What was Steve talking about? I wanted to believe there was some sort of explanation, but deep down, I already knew. Amanda came out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her hair, her face glowing from the steam. She froze when she saw me, standing there with her phone in my hand. "What's wrong?" she asked, her smile faltering. I held up the phone, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Care to explain this?" Her eyes darted to the screen, and for a split second, she looked panicked. Then, just as quickly, her expression shifted to indignant. "Why are you looking at my phone? Are you serious right now?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Don't turn this around on me, Amanda. What is Steve talking about? What did you do?" She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "It's not what you think, Mark." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, of course not. It's never what I think, is it? So go ahead, enlighten me. What exactly does he mean by last night was incredible?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. For a long, agonizing moment, Amanda just stood there, staring at me with her mouth slightly open, like she was searching for the perfect excuse. I could feel my blood boiling, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard I thought it might splinter. "Well," I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of my anger. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her face flushing. "Oh, please," I spat, shaking the phone in the air. "Then tell me, Amanda, what exactly does it look like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been sneaking around with our neighbor." She ran a hand through her damp hair, avoiding my gaze. "Mark, you're overreacting. Steve and I are just friends." "Friends?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Friends don't send texts like this. Wish you were here? Last night was incredible? What does that even mean?" She finally looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "It's a joke, okay? We were just joking around. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "A joke," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You're telling me this is all some big misunderstanding? Do you really think I'm that stupid?" Her defensive mask started to crack. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth? Steve and I have been hanging out more because you're never around. You're always working late, always distracted. I needed someone to talk to, someone who actually listens." "That's not talking," I shot back, holding up the phone again. "That's lying. That's sneaking around behind my back. Do you even hear yourself right now?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "Not this time. I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered, her voice trembling. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Get this far?" I repeated, the words barely audible. "So you're admitting it then? Something happened between you and Steve." She didn't answer right away, her silence speaking louder than any excuse she could have come up with. "How long?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" Her shoulders sagged, and she finally looked at me, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. "It didn't mean anything, Mark. I swear. It was just a moment of weakness. I was lonely, and Steve was convenient." I finished for her, my anger flaring up again. "That's what you're saying, isn't it?" She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, disgusted. "Mark, please. I'm sorry. It was a mistake. It'll never happen again." But her words felt hollow, like an echo in a cavern of betrayal. I stared at Amanda, my mind racing. Her words, "It'll never happen again," rang in my ears like a mocking chant, as if she thought an apology could erase everything, as if she didn't just admit to betraying me with the one person I never expected. "How long?" I asked again, my voice quiet but firm. Her lip trembled, and she looked down at the floor. "A couple of months," she admitted, barely above a whisper. I felt the air leave my lungs. "A couple of months?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months, Amanda? Sneaking around with Steve while I was—" My voice broke, and I couldn't finish the sentence. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly, her eyes pleading. It just started small. We were talking, and it felt nice to have someone listen to me, someone who wasn't me." I snapped, finishing her sentence for her. "That's what you're saying, right? That I'm the problem here? Her tears came faster now, and she shook her head. No, Mark, that's not what I mean. I felt invisible, like you didn't see me anymore. Invisible? I laughed bitterly, pacing the small living room. Amanda, I've been working my tail off to give us a good life, to keep this house running, to make sure we're comfortable. But sure, I guess I should have spent more time worrying about your ego. That's not fair, she shot back, her voice trembling. You don't get to throw that in my face. I tried to talk to you so many times, Mark. You just didn't care enough to listen. Don't you dare, I growled, pointing a finger at her. Don't you dare try to pin this on me. You're the one who made this choice. You're the one who... My voice cracked, and I felt my throat tighten. You're the one who threw everything away. Amanda reached for me again, but I stepped back, shaking my head. I can't do this right now, I muttered, grabbing my coat and heading for the door. Mark, wait, she called after me, her voice desperate. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I needed air, space, anything to stop the walls from closing in on me. As I stepped outside, the chill of the morning air hit me like a slap. I looked over at Steve's house, my fists clenching at the sight of his car parked smugly in the driveway. The betrayal wasn't just Amanda's. It was his too. My wife and my neighbor. How did it come to this? The anger brewing inside me demanded an outlet. My feet carried me before my brain could catch up, and within moments, I was standing on Steve's porch. My fist slammed against his door with a force that startled even me. It wasn't long before he opened it, wearing his usual smug grin, like this was just another casual day. Hey, Mark. I didn't let him finish. Cut the crap, Steve, I growled, stepping closer. I know about you and Amanda. His smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a flicker of panic. Look, man, I can explain. Explain? I barked, my voice trembling with fury. You're going to explain why you thought it was okay to sleep with my wife. My wife, Steve. You're supposed to be my neighbor, my friend. He held up his hands defensively. Mark, it wasn't like that. Don't you dare lie to me, I snapped, cutting him off. She admitted it. I saw the texts. So spare me whatever excuse you're about to pull out of thin air. Steve's face paled, and for the first time, I saw his confident exterior crack. I didn't mean for it to happen, he muttered, looking down. It just got out of hand. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You've been sneaking around with my wife for months, and you didn't want to hurt me? I'm sorry, man, he said, his voice weak. I don't know what else to say. I took a step closer, my fists clenching at my sides. Max's bark echoed faintly from our yard, but I barely noticed. All I could see was Steve, this man who had the audacity to smile at me, borrow my tools, and act like a friend while stabbing me in the back. You've destroyed my life, I said through gritted teeth. My marriage, my trust, everything. And for what? What was so important that you had to take it all from me? Steve opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was answer enough. I shook my head, stepping back. You're a coward, I said, my voice cold. And you'll regret this. I promise you that. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. As I crossed the yard back to my house, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. Amanda's betrayal, Steve's lies, the life I thought I had crumbling before my eyes. Inside, Amanda was waiting, her face streaked with tears. Where did you go? She asked, her voice trembling. I confronted him, I said flatly, not meeting her gaze. Her eyes widened. Mark, you didn't? No. I cut her off, my voice sharp. I didn't hit him, if that's what you're asking. But I should have. We stood there in silence, the tension between us almost unbearable. Finally I spoke. You've both made your choices. Now it's my turn. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Amanda tried to talk to me, but I couldn't hear her through the roaring in my head. Every time I looked at her, I saw Steve's smug face, his words echoing in my mind. I didn't mean for it to happen. By evening, I'd made my decision. I found Amanda in the living room, sitting on the couch with Max at her feet. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Mark, she began, her voice breaking. Please, can we talk? No, I said firmly, standing a few feet away. We're past talking, Amanda. You crossed the line, and there's no coming back from this. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I know I screwed up, she sobbed. But I love you. I don't want to lose you. I felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe, but it wasn't enough to sway me. You should have thought about that before you lied to me. Before you turned to him instead of your husband. She looked up, her expression desperate. It didn't mean anything, Mark. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. But it's you I want. Please give me a chance to make this right. I shook my head, my resolve hardening. How am I supposed to believe that? You've been lying to me for months, Amanda. Months. Do you know what that does to a person? To their trust. She didn't respond, just sat there sobbing quietly. I've already called a lawyer, I said after a long silence. Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face frozen in shock. What? I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. It's the only way forward. I can't stay in this marriage knowing what you've done. I deserve better than this. Her sobs turned to outright wailing, and for a moment, I felt like the villain in a movie. But then I reminded myself of everything she'd done, the texts, the lies, the betrayal. I wasn't the villain here. I walked out of the room, leaving her to her tears. Upstairs, I packed a small bag. I didn't want to spend another night in that house, under the same roof as Amanda. As I grabbed my keys, Max followed me to the door, his tail wagging uncertainly. Sorry, buddy, I whispered, kneeling down to scratch his ears. You stay here tonight, okay? I drove to a hotel on the other side of town, the silence in the car deafening. For the first time since the discovery, I felt a sliver of relief. I'd made my decision, and there was no turning back. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of everything hit me all at once. The end of my marriage, the betrayal of a man I once called a friend, the life I thought I had, gone in an instant. But there was also a strange sense of clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let Amanda or Steve define my story. The next morning, I woke up in the hotel room with a sense of finality. For the first time in weeks, my mind wasn't spinning with doubts or unanswered questions. I'd made my choice, and now it was about taking the next steps. I called Amanda before checking out, my voice as calm as I could manage. I'll be by later to grab the rest of my things, I said. Mark, please, she said, her voice cracking. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, start fresh, anything you want. Just don't leave like this. There's no going back, I replied firmly. I've already contacted the lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon. She started to cry again, but I ended the call before the guilt could creep in. By the time I returned to the house, Amanda had clearly been crying for hours. Her face was puffy, and her eyes looked hollow. I didn't say much as I packed my things, only speaking when necessary. Max hovered near me, his tail wagging weakly, as if he knew something was wrong. You can keep Max, I said finally, breaking the silence. He'd miss you too much if I took him. She nodded, clutching the dog's collar like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Mark, I'll never stop being sorry, she whispered. I paused, meeting her gaze for the first time that day. I believe you're sorry, Amanda, but sorry doesn't undo what you did. With that, I walked out the door, my bag slung over my shoulder, and didn't look back. The weeks that followed were hard. The house felt empty, even though I'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Friends and family tried to comfort me, but there was no way to soften the blow. I kept busy, throwing myself into work, hitting the gym, and even joining a local hiking group to clear my head. As for Steve, I made it clear he was dead to me. Word got around the neighborhood about what had happened, and from what I heard, he wasn't exactly welcome at barbecues anymore. Amanda kept her distance, respecting my wishes not to contact me. It wasn't until a few months later, during one of my solo hikes, that I felt a sense of peace. The sun was setting over the trees, casting everything in a golden light, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry or broken. I just felt free. Looking back now, I've learned a lot. Betrayal has a way of stripping everything down to the basics, forcing you to confront who you are and what you want out of life. I learned that trust is fragile, and that sometimes the people you love the most are capable of hurting you in ways you never imagined. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. That it's okay to walk away when someone doesn't value you. If you're reading this because you're in a similar situation, here's my advice. Trust your instincts, protect your heart, and don't settle for less than you deserve. Life has a funny way of surprising you, even after it falls apart. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe to the channel and like the video.